Hey everybody, welcome back to Video episode. Today we're going to continue the series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and it is becoming like whack-a-mole with Robert and the new Nintendo 64 work-in-progress core on MiSTer. Keeps putting up core updates, we keep knocking out videos, and we see who gets to win. All jokes aside, I still cannot believe the speed at which he's able to accomplish some of these changes, because again, 48 hours later, this core has gotten so much better, and I'm about to show you a ton of it. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But if you remember last time we showed you Mario, some of the levels just didn't have any ground whatsoever, and that is because they used different elements of the RDP, or Reality Display Processor. We now have full ground and other effects on this level in Super Mario 64. Obviously, they are not perfect yet, but they are here. Every single time Robert updates the core, he adds a new implementation or other feature into RDP for FPGA, and we start seeing other things. I mean, take a look at this, such an iconic moment in Super Mario 64. You grab the baby penguin, and you have a choice. Bring him back to his mother or throw him over the edge. It's become a meme at this point in time. But this is just the level you would know and expect, and to do so, I tried to take a shortcut that I would usually take back in the day as a kid and still do on real hardware. Jump here, slide at just the right time, and you can totally get over this gap without taking a death. I was able to do it on the current core, and isn't that impressive? But there's so many new working games as well. Obviously, Banjo-Kazooie is one of the most well-known Nintendo 64 games not made by Nintendo themselves, and on the previous core it showed a few bits of graphics and then would just freeze. And if you can't tell already, this is fundamentally so much more of Banjo-Kazooie than we have ever seen on this core. Obviously, there's still some graphical glitches here. Gruntilda has some of these white lines on her. It's another effect of RDP that just isn't working. Now, a lot of people have also been asking about these speed issues. It seems like some games run faster than others. Right now, the cache for the CPU is not implemented in the core, and Robert has mentioned that he plans on doing that later, just because it is a little bit more of an annoying thing apparently. So the speed you see on screen is not indicative of what it's going to run at its finale. This is just because the cache is missing. That's basically just a bit of memory that the CPU uses. Without access to the cache, it is definitely taking more cycles to accomplish the same thing, hence the slowdowns you see. But that's been a very curious thing that a lot of people have been wondering about and leaving comments down below. The lack of CPU cache does affect the speed in certain games depending on how they utilize it. The CPU in whatever device you're watching this on right now has cache. If that became disabled, it probably would just stop working. The fact that this even does anything without the cache in and of itself is just wild. But navigating around this first introductory area in Banjo-Kazooie, the controls are tight, everything looks good, except Banjo obviously having those little bits of white aberration on him. And of course we don't have texture filtering in, but I keep saying this every single video, I actually love the look of this, and I'm so excited to hear that Robert's thinking about leaving a toggle in the finished core so we can have texture filtering or not, because I think I would just rather play some of these games without the texture filtering, even though those pixels are massive. Now because it doesn't run at full speed, sometimes you're just going to make a mistake. I'm going to go across this bridge and jump like I always would and just miss some inputs and fall to basically half of my death. But it is hilarious, it's working, and it never used to work before. Now moving on to Mario Kart 64, a game that Robert seems to prioritize because it's one of his favorites. We now have full sprites in the game, and there are no black boxes around them. This looks outside of texture filtering like the game should look. If I showed you a screenshot, you would never know it wasn't working correctly. Because in previous versions, we used to drive around as just a black box, and in more recent revisions, you would have a duplicated sprite with a black box around it. And this is all just implementing different features in the Reality Display Processor. This is not currently full speed, but I will show you some full speed content in just a little bit. But this is Mario Kart 64. This is proof that obviously the Nintendo 64 is possible on MiSTer FPGA, and you will see here we have the ground as well as the walls in levels that used to just be black. If we move over to the previous example, we would have the vehicles in the level itself, but the ground, the walls using different functions of RDP would not show up whatsoever. So this is another instance of just pure innovation and pure improvement. This is night and day, pun very much intended, as went from dark to light of an improvement on the current Nintendo 64 core. And at the speed at which Robert keeps dropping these things, it's very possible that I'll be back doing this again on Monday. He released 2 update cores in about 18 hours, and I'm working on the second of those 2. But as we move into DK's Jungle Parkway here, a level that never used to load, it used to freeze, go ahead and listen to the music, and I'll come back and show you some more games that are just working. But enjoy. Sounds pretty close to good, but let's move over to time trial mode. Robbie on the MiSTer Discord indicated this to me and other people, and that if you do time trial, it runs much faster. And obviously that's down to the fact that the game is no longer controlling CPU opponents, because the CPU opponents obviously take CPU cycles, and that requires CPU cache, which we don't currently have. So when it is only dealing with your inputs and not that predictive AI that has rubber banding and all sorts of other calculations going along with it, you're going to see a marked improvement in the frame rate. This is running what seems to be full speed. I counted the timer in the corner with frames in DaVinci Resolve, and it was basically near to a perfect second based upon the frame counter. Now, of course, that's going to the 100 place. My frame counter only goes to 60, so it's not perfect, but it's basically as on the money as you could possibly get. But let's move over to another game that just got improvements. That's Star Soldier Vanishing Earth. Last time I showed you this game, it had a lot of mangled graphics, but the introductory sequence here looks like I remember it looking. It's been some years since I played it, and when we get into the game, it's going to start looking like an actual game. You have your ship, you have the graphics, you have your opponent ships, everything looks like a shmup. Sure, we have a little bit of garbage to the left and right hand side of the screen, but it does look like you would expect it to look if you were playing it. Now, if we move over to the previous capture from just basically 72 hours ago, this is what the game looked like. There was an issue in RDP rendering where it was quadrupling certain things, and Robert has 100% patched that up, and the games were affected by it. Now you see that you only have one image, not four, and that's what was going on there. It was basically duplicating 4 times, and that gave it a very weird look. But it's another game that's seen drastic improvement since basically Thursday when we talked about it last time. That is how fast this core goes. Robert keeps saying he hopes to get something done by a month, 2 months, and then he shows up 8 hours later and he's already solved it. We kind of think that he might just be trolling us. Honestly, it's kind of the joke prevailing right now because he just moves at such a breakneck speed, but it's so much fun to keep up with it and show you guys what is happening. Now, last video I showed you guys Cruisin' USA, so I figured let's take a look at Cruisin' World. It is running on the current core, and it is running really well, just not full speed. And that is down to the lack of a CPU cache. Now, what the cache does is it's basically a set of temporary memory that the CPU can access that's going to be faster than if you were loading off any other storage medium. On your CPU, you can read from RAM, you can read from the CPU cache, but you can also read from the hard drive, obviously being the slowest. Think of the cartridge as the hard drive in this instance, and the CPU missing its cache just means that it cannot run at full speed. But it controls great, it looks good, and it also sounds really good as well, and I'll give you a sound sample in just a moment. But all of these racing games, the Cruisins, now just work on the core. You can race and you can even win if you're pretty good. But go ahead and listen to that music. It is quite nice, and I'll be back because I got tons of games to keep showing you. But enjoy.
Checkpoint!
Yeah, that sounds pretty close to Cruisin' USA. There might be a little bit of speed differential in the music, but sometimes music is also tied to the CPU speed, and if it is running slow, you can end up in situations where the music starts to sound slow as well. Took a crash here, but somehow so did everybody else, and I ended up advancing into second place, which was actually a win for me, because I was in third before that accident happened. So crash, and sometimes good things will happen to you. Now, a game that is running more, but still not getting in game that I know everyone's going to ask about is Paper Mario. This is where the franchise basically got its start, unless you count Super Mario RPG on the Super Nintendo. It is kind of like a precursor to this game. But you're going to see the introductory screen run. You're going to have music, you're going to have text. The reason I'm showing this to you is twofold though. One, it's another game that's working that never used to work before this core, and two, it actually throws up an error message on the debug side that explains why it crashed. Not every single game is going to give you any information on screen when it crashes. Some have that error bug reporting and some don't, so sometimes you're not sure, unless you're Robert working on the core, why something didn't work. But this is a really good example of an instance where I can explain to you what's not working in a freeze frame. But again, up until the point that it does freeze, it is working, and I can't wait to play this game again. It's probably been 10 or 15 years since I played it, and my wife and I are playing through all the Paper Marios in reverse order because she loves them as well, and I hope that the Nintendo 64 core is done when we get to it. But you'll see here we have a hard crash, and then you're going to get an error report. Thread 4, there was an error address load. That means it's trying to load from a certain memory address, and it's just not succeeding at that. That is not uncommon. Not being able to find the right file or the right information halts the CPU because it doesn't know what else to do. But let's go back to Super Mario 64, and of course we're going to deliver that penguin. I don't have the heart to throw him over the edge, but I knew if I didn't show you what I did with him, people would be asking questions. And again, this is just probably, in my opinion, one of the most playable games on the current core alongside Mario Kart 64, but I just love this game. I recently replayed it on the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection, and I can't wait to play it again on MiSTer as it gets further evolved. But you can beat this game, people have cleared it. Let's take this tornado right here though. I love that you can see the polygon matrix inside of it. It isn't perfect, but you do get the Mario spin, and this tornado is going to take me a second time, and I feel like this is really unfair here. I'm going to try to spin to get into the pyramid, and I'm going to miss that landing by just a couple pixels and slide down into my death. Just feels 100% like the game was trolling me, but hey, it still works. But let's move over to another level. You can just see how much is rendering. That moon is in the sky, but of course it is pixelated. But again, I love that look. Depending on how much is on screen, the speed is going to be a variable in Mario. If you end up in a level that's not drawing too much geometry, you're not doing too much, you're going to see a speed improvement. If you end up in an area like this where there's a lot of different dynamic effects going on, you will end up seeing the frame rate get slower. But again, that is improvements that will come later. It seems to be that Robert's working on the video modes, all the different ways you can draw an image to the actual screen, and then from there the speed improvements are going to come secondarily, and that makes perfect sense. It's like doing a rough cut versus a lock cut of a film. We put all the pieces in place, we just don't make them clean, and then once we know everything we need is there, we come back in and make it something that we're going to present to a client or a viewer. Like this music that I'm going to present to you in 3, 2, 1, enjoy. Sounds really close to accurate. There's definitely some distortion in there, and I'm not sure if it's because I'm using the level select ROM, but once I actually get up here, there is no boss to fight whatsoever, so I'm not sure if that's a core bug or the level select bug. Leave me a comment down below and tell me if you know. But if you go into a level that's drawing less, you're going to see Mario just starts moving around faster, and that is because that CPU cache being missing doesn't affect it as much when there's not anything on screen. But let's move over to another game that is working and working really well, and that's going to be Snowboard Kids. If you've never played it, you definitely owe it to yourself to do so. It is an awesome game that's basically Mario Kart on snow with a really interesting lap structure that when you get to the bottom of the hill, you take the ski lift back up and run the course again. This is one of those hidden gems in the Nintendo 64 that I'm always trying to convince people to play, and now I'm trying to convince you, the viewer, to play it as well. But leave me a comment down below and tell me what your favorite Nintendo 64 game is, and if you played Snowboard Kids. This menu screen right here is perfect. I see absolutely no issues with it whatsoever. You could show me a screenshot and I would tell you it's on real Nintendo 64 hardware. Now when we actually get into the game, you're going to see the texture filtering is still not there, and it's definitely not running at full speed, but it is running. The game is correct, everything is functioning. I definitely deem this as playable, and somebody on the MiSTer Discord asked what they thought the definition of playable was. If you can enjoy the game, if you can get from the top to the bottom of a race course, if it's controlling correctly and you know what you're doing, I consider that to be playable. If it is running at a frame rate in which the controls are no longer responsive, or if it's freezing, I consider that unplayable. But tell me down below what you think. But again, this is just such a fun game, and the sequel's fun as well, and it's one of the rarest Nintendo 64 games, and it is definitely expensive, so being able to hopefully in the future play Snowboard Kids 2 on MiSTer FPGA would be an absolutely awesome time. But I had to choose between one of the games, and I went with the original because it's the one in my collection, and I absolutely do love it. And it's another one of those games that's just so much fun to play with friends. All of the graphics here, all of the textures are perspective correct. Everything is just working, including all of those lighting modes and kind of those glows in the background. You'll see a little bit of weirdness here and there, but if this had the texture filtering and you showed me a screenshot, again, it would be another game that I would just say I couldn't tell if it was running on real hardware or on MiSTer FPGA. Obviously that statement doesn't stand when you actually get the games in motion, but it's one of those things, if I just showed you a photo, you probably could get fooled depending on how closely you were looking. Let's move over to Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3. Everyone asked me to test it. It goes this far, and then it crashes. Now you know. But another racing game that I keep showing examples from is Wave Race 64. This is what it currently looks like. All of the graphics are in place. They are not perfect, but they do work. The game is definitely running slower than you would expect, including the sound, but it does function. I'm going to give you an example of the sound on this one as well, so you can kind of hear when the sound and music speed up and slow down. But we went from this to this in the first core where we had absolutely no graphics whatsoever outside of the water, to the second core where we had some textures but not the walls, and this is what the game sounds like. Listen, and I'll be right back. It's just impressive how many more visuals we have. But let's move over to a game that everyone keeps asking me to test, and that is Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Now I'm going to tell you right now, Robert has implemented a special feature into this core. It's called Creepypasta Mode. This is a creepypasta come to life, and if you don't know what that term is, look it up. It was very popular in years past. But you'll get into the main menu, you'll get into the name select screen. Obviously it doesn't look perfect, but it is 100% functioning. But when you get into game, that is when the creepypasta shows up, because it's going to just pop up with this image of Link staring into your soul. It's going to go black, and then in just a moment, he's going to come right back. He knows your sins, he knows where the bodies are buried. Don't mess with him, he will come for you. All jokes aside, let's move over to a happy game, Nagano. This is now drawing full graphics onto the screen. We have a skier, we have snow, we have nets, we have gates, we have everything we need to make it actually look like we're skiing downhill, or as good of a rendition of that the Nintendo 64 could do. And this is another game that just keeps improving with every single core, and in just a moment I'll show you what it used to look like. Again, it's not a game that's running at full speed, but it's running, it's playable, and it is worth checking out in the testing, because it just used to look like this. You'd have a skier, you'd have a couple trees, but before that it was just a black box with some trees. This is what it looks like now, and Robert has done this in like 8 days. This is something that you would expect to take, 2-4 weeks depending on the speed in which you want to work. He just keeps knocking them out. He makes new cores like I drink beers. Now moving over to another game that everyone wanted to see test, Mystical Ninja starring Goemon. The entire introductory sequence does work, and the theme song plays as well, and I wanted to give you a listen to it, but after the Buck Bumble theme song copyright flag went up, I didn't feel like uploading this video twice in one day. I'll have to check to see if this actually throws a copyright strike, but this is another one of those games on Nintendo 64 that I think is really nearing the hidden gem status. I don't hear many people mention this game at all outside of Mr. Discord, but leave me a comment down below and tell me if you played it, because if you haven't, once it starts working on the core and stops freezing and gets close to done, it is 100% a game I highly recommend you play. But you will see here, we can get into the in-game cutscenes. The camera is going to pan back. This is definitely not at full speed, and the reason that I wanted you to hear the intro but couldn't right now is because the introductory song ends before the graphics are drawn. So when the rendering is delayed and the song ends, it just stops playing any music whatsoever. But you'll see here, right when we get close to actually being able to take some control of the game, if I hit start or do anything whatsoever, it's going to throw a little bit more text up on the screen, and it is now just hard frozen. And a game that everyone asked me to test and finally does run is Sin and Punishment. I wouldn't say this is a hidden gem because a ton of people know about it, but it's still one of those games on Nintendo 64 that I feel like a large majority of the audience, especially ones that weren't into importing back in the day, just may not know about. You will see the introductory cutscene running here, but you do need to press start before it ends, or else you're going to lock up the core and have to reset it. You can get in game in this one and you can obtain control, but after like 5 to 10 seconds of actually controlling it, it's going to lock up as well. Hopefully next core revision we're going to be able to play some Sin and Punishment, because it is an absolutely fun game that if you've never played you should check out, but you'll see it froze there. But I just don't get it. Robert keeps dropping these cores. I don't know what he's doing in the background. He is just an absolute robot when it comes to making FPGA code. Everyone that works in the MiSTer scene, everyone that makes cores is talented in their own right, but I do think Robert may be the fastest code writer of them all. Short of that, I'll probably be back Monday with another episode of this, because he won't leave us alone. He keeps making us get up and do more videos. Truth be told, I love doing them. Short of that, I'll see you guys next time with Nintendo 64. It's getting good. Bye-bye.